Very good. Finally, this is one.
to Sajas taking us through with the workshop. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Ravi.
much.
So yeah, just as introduced before, Sergey Sustinov is our consultant, our expert on soil pollution. He joined 3 years ago, FAO and the Global Soil Partnership, and he will be explaining how the process has been and what we have collected from all of you. So Sergey, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Ravi. Well, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all colleagues here. It's my honor to present. Although you're not here also to listen to me, but to show myself, I'm just going to give you the results of what has been done over the last 10 months. I hope you can see my screen in full. Can you confirm? Because I cannot. Natalia, can you see my screen in full? Okay, perfect. Yes, you can see it. So today we have quite a rich agenda. I think first of all, I will start my quick and short presentation to explain you the scope and objectives of this activity, the collecting compilation of those threshold values across the world, and also what are the next steps and why we decided to work on this. Thank to all members who actually involved in sharing those information, representing their countries. I see many of members who supporting us in this journey are here today. And then we're going to go ahead and explain what our partners, Aragon and Common Forum, did and what they're actually doing, what's their focus on in this activity, because we're not the only ones who are actually doing this. We have Common Forum is at Aragon. I know European Environment Agency is also doing the same task. So in order to avoid replications, it's quite essential that we work hand in hand and collaborate with each other, so we can go together much faster. And then obviously, moving on from Common Forum and Aragon, which represent most of the European Union, we decided to invite some speakers outside European Union to represent their threshold values in their country and how they were developed, derived, and how they're implemented. Today, I have an honor to invite on board representative from Russia Federation to explain how threshold values in Russia were derived and are used, but also in China. And I'm pretty sure in the next upcoming workshops, we're going to have more countries stepping in and explaining the procedure, because values is just the numbers, but what stands behind those values is much more important. And after that, we're going to have a hopefully very rich discussion, open discussion, where I invite all of our participants to join and perhaps represent their country who was not mentioned in my presentation today, and build on the next step. What needs to be done next? As I said, values is just one thing, but how those values were derived is completely different reality that we have to face and understand. And hopefully, we're going to have a very solid, remarkable conclusions that will be delivered by Professor Ravi Naidu, INSOP chair. So just a quick overall picture of who we are again. Our network consists of the steering committee. There's just 7 of us. Each of us are responsible for the working group. 4 working groups that we're running here: assessment, monitoring, remediation, and food safety. Food safety is mostly working with farmer communities and developing materials to train farmers on preventative measures of soil pollution. But here for the assessment working group, excuse me, that's where this activity comes in, the threshold values activity. Now, last year, during the annual meeting, what was held online June last year, all INSOP members and the steering committee decided that we need to focus on one of the specific priority, which is to advocate for the development of global harmonized methods, including SOPs, to identify and measure soil pollutants. Right now, we're focusing on developing pesticide residue, how to measure pesticides in the soils. And the second activity, excuse me, that's priority 2 here, is to advocate for creating a global database on soil pollutant threshold values, not only in agricultural soils, but also in other land uses, focusing right now just on heavy metals and pesticides. Now, we have many different contaminants to deal with, but for now, we cannot target everything. So we decided to focus and start with the ones that we have most knowledge: heavy metals and metalloids and pesticides. Specific activities for that is to better understand the existing threshold values across the world and identify gaps, countries that don't have anything, and work together collaboratively with partners, with members, to develop a database on global technical report on those threshold values. Again, not just displaying the values, but explaining the process and the risk assessment, how those threshold values have been derived. The thing is that we need to identify what are the threshold values. Now, if you're going to go into the literature, you will find many definitions of them, starting with soil guideline values, screening values, soil standards, action values, trigger, target values, acceptable concentrations, intervention values, cleanup, threshold, etc., etc. So I can continue. I think you can complement this list. So for us, it was quite important to define and agree on a definition. And therefore, we prioritized those 2 definitions. The first one, we start with the screening values, which we defined according to the FAO and UNEP report that we developed in 2021, and INSOP steering committee agrees with this. The screening values are the values above which additional investigation or risk assessment is required to determine whether the risk is acceptable or not. And we also work on intervention values, which for us means that values above which remediation or risk management actions are required. It means that they represent an unacceptable risk, and there's a requirement for certain remediation and risk management action. These are the definitions that we stick to, and we try to be consistent with these 2. And we understand that different countries have either both screening values and intervention values, which is the case for some of the countries that we discovered, or most of the countries have just one definition, one values, either intervention or screening. We still need to investigate how they derive with this. Based on those definitions and several consultations with our members, we developed this template that we sent to our members to let us know whether their country has those threshold values. focusing on different land uses. The land uses that we prioritize for now are residential, industrial, and of course, agricultural, because at the end, we're a food and agriculture organization. And we also gave option for additional land uses so that to discover and understand if other countries, for example, in Germany, they have a lot of different land uses among those three that you just see here on the screen. We also defined specific contaminants that we're focusing on, as I said, heavy metals and metalloids, but also pesticides that are the most common that are used in agriculture. So based on this template that we derived, we send it to our members and also partners, Common Forum and ARAGORN, to help us collect the information from various countries. This is the map showing what we have collected. So the green countries are those marked here that we collected and compiled the threshold values from those countries. Now you can see here, most of the Europe is green, which is good, but we also have some other countries that you can see here representative. You can also see many countries that are still gray, which means that we did not receive any information either because threshold values simply do not exist in these countries, which is the case for many African countries, or simply because we don't have a strong and good connections either through INSOP network to understand whether those threshold values exist. For example, India, Argentina, Peru, you can see here, Thailand, we still have a gap because we haven't heard anything from our members. So our next approach is to understand from global soil partnership focal points, which are usually ministries of agriculture or the ministries of environment, whether these countries really have their threshold values or not. As I said, this work has been done in partnership with our friends Common Forum and ARAGORN project, who supported us significantly in collecting information from European countries. So a big thanks to Dietmar and Natalie and Ksenia and the rest of the team for making the European Union green. But also to our members that I would like to use the opportunity and thank here. We received also from the European region members who supported us in collecting information from Czechia, from Denmark, Germany, Greece, France, Israel also here, although Israel is not part of the European Union, in FAO it's classified as Europe, so we thank very much for Israel, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, Russian Federation also support us a lot in this, Switzerland, Ukraine as well, and the United Kingdom. Those are the members that I would like to acknowledge and use the opportunity to thank them. But also other regions, not just Europe, as I said, we're going beyond European region. And so we also receive threshold values and a big contribution also received from Australia, from People's Republic of China, Japan, Laos, Pakistan, and Vietnam. And also from South Africa, we received a support from our Russian member who helped us to collect information from South Africa. And also from Americas, we received threshold values from Brazil, Mexico, and also from the MENA region, Jordan. And I'm pleased to know that the United Arab Emirates just developed their threshold values this year. Although I cannot share them, but they will be available very soon. So thank you very much to all members for their support and compilation of those threshold values. What is next? So next, we need to make sure that countries that we compile all the information from other countries. So as I said, we still have a lack from those countries that I mentioned here. So we need to investigate either through INSOP members if they are here from those countries, or as I said, through the global soil partnership focal points, whether those countries have the real threshold values at the national or regional level, in order to make sure that we really have a global picture represented. Next, we also need to understand, as I said, these are just the numbers, but how those numbers derived is the next and most important step for us to see and understand. We need to see and describe the differences in the approaches used for derivation of these threshold values in different countries, how those values been derived, and whether all major pathways of human exposure as well as environmental exposure been taken into account when they derive them and calculate the risk assessment. So this is very important activity for us to investigate jointly. And I hope that next year, well, yeah, because this year is quite almost the end, we will have at least some of those questions to be answered. And also, for those countries who doesn't have anything at the national or regional level, FAO and the specifically Global SOP Partnership is willing to support those countries to derive their own threshold values based on the approach that we've already described at the FAO-UNEP joint report 4 years ago on how to develop those threshold values. Of course, if the countries are willing to do this. We know that some countries, for example, Malaysia, uses threshold values derived by the US, or Colombia use the threshold values derived from Mexico. So we want to know whether they really want to keep up with those threshold values from other countries, or they want to implement their own. And that's where GSP and INSOP experts can mobilize together and support those countries in the next step. Well, that's basically a big kind of a presentation from my side that I would like to share with you and show the progress of what has been done, but also what needs to be done next, that we can discuss in an open discussion after the full presentation will be delivered in the next hour or so. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to note them now, and we will address them immediately in the open discussion. I'm going to have about 40 minutes to address those and other questions that you may have. That's it from me. Natalia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. So let's open the floor if there are any pressing questions you want to raise, or issues you want to raise, Naya, before we pass to the next speaker. Just feel free to raise your hand if you have anything you want to mention before we start. No? Okay. Then let's move on to the next presentation. It will be done by Natalie Briels from ARC Consulting about the ARAGORN Horizon project and the work in the threshold values compilation. Natalie, let me know if you have any issues sharing your screen. No, I see.
I'm gonna try. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Just put presentation mode. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Great. You can go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction. And also I would like to thank the organizers of the workshop to allow us to present the work of ARAGORN in relation to the threshold values. So as was already said, my name is Natalie Briels. I work at ARC Consulting. We are a consulting company based in Belgium, and we are one of the 17 partners of the ARAGORN project. And together with my colleague Steen van Hees, who is also attending the workshop today, we compiled the soil threshold values for Europe. A little bit about the ARAGORN project. ARAGORN is an acronym for Achieving Remediation and Governing Restoration of Contaminated Soils Now. It's a Horizon Europe project. It was kicked off in last year in October 2023, so it's been running for a year now, and it will run for another 3 years until 2027. And the project falls under the EU mission, A Soil Deal for Europe, which is the ambition of the European Union to transition to healthier soils by 2030. This is an overview of the consortium. We are, as I already mentioned, 17 partners from 12 different European countries. And to get an overview of where all of the partners are from, you can see a European map on the top right there. The project is coordinated by Xenia Trier from the University of Copenhagen and Hans-Peter Arp from the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute. And we are partners from different backgrounds. So we have academic institutions, SMEs, industry partners, but also public authorities. And, the project has 4 main objectives. So the first objective is to map contaminated sites in Europe. And within the project, we focus on 4 large contaminant groups. That's metals, PFAS, organochlorine and organobromine contaminants, and petroleum and coal substances. A second objective is to evaluate remediation and immobilization techniques. So we have partners working on that, both through a scientific literature study, but also lab testing that's going on at the moment. And then we have a group of partners who is specifically investigating soil resilience and ecological restoration of soil after remediation to assess the impact that remediation has on the soil. And finally, we are to develop a risk assessment framework that can be used for stakeholders dealing with contaminated land. And this will be mostly in the form of guidelines that will not only include how to perform a chemical risk assessment, but also information on socioeconomic analysis and the different remediation options that exist. And all of this to avoid a regrettable remediation, because of course remediation can be a solution to contaminated land, but it's not always the most desirable option, or different remediation techniques might be more suitable than others, depending on the contamination. So how are we doing that? We are looking at specific case studies. We have selected 9 European sites that are contaminated, where we will use to develop this risk assessment framework. And we will do that in strong collaboration with the stakeholders. So we also have a co-creation work package. So that's also a large focus of the ARAGORN project, especially because in the end, we want to deliver something that as well private as public land managers can use to prioritize, plan, and make an informed decision on what to do with their contaminated land. So within the ARAGORN project, why did we actually do the compilation of the soil threshold values? Initially, is it because we are going to develop this risk assessment framework? And in an initial risk assessment, we want EU stakeholders to be able to compare their soil concentrations with their national legislations or their national legislative values. And a second reason why we looked into soil threshold values is because we wanted to see if the analytical methods that we possess within the consortium, if they are sensitive enough to even compare with the national threshold values. And while we were doing that, we were actually lucky that we are now in this momentum where we have a legal framework on the European table for soil protection that is called the Directive on Soil Monitoring and Resilience. So while we were doing this compilation and talking to different organizations about our work, we noticed that there was a big interest in this work. In Europe, in the framework, of course, of this future soil monitoring law. Also, we are very happy to collaborate on a more global scale with INSOP on this matter, because we realized at some point that many different organizations were doing this work in parallel. And we think that it's very critical to collaborate with the other organizations to prevent duplicative efforts. And we are, of course, very happy to share our data with INSOP. And also the same goes in the other way. We are also very happy to receive feedback from INSOP members that could validate our work as well. So while INSOP is working towards the comprehensive global database and report, we will be happy to contribute with and provide the insights that we gained from a European perspective. How did we go about compiling the EU soil threshold values? We had a very nice starting point, which was a publication from the European Environment Agency published in 2023 on soil indicators and soil threshold values. And this the report was about more than soil pollution, but it gave a good overview of work that had already been done on this topic, and also it gave already a nice summary on the commonalities and differences that currently exist between European countries. And it made a reference to a very important work that was published by the GRC in 2007, and that was edited by Carlon et al., which is a very elaborate description of 14 or 15 different European countries and how their risk assessment frameworks work in different countries, including how the soil threshold values are derived, and listings of these soil screening values or soil threshold values. And this was published by the Heracles framework, which was founded in the early 2000s, already to convert or to stimulate convergence of the risk assessment procedures between the different European countries. But of course, this document was already 17 years old. So some of the values had already been updated in the meantime, and to be able to get the most recent values, we made use of the FAO-GSP databases to get access to the different national legislations. And of course, these legislations, they are in the different national languages, which thanks to good translation software, we're able to extract the important information. But of course, some nuances probably got lost in translation. So we were very happy to get the help of the International Consortium of ARAGORN to validate the values for some of the countries. And I would also like to thank Dietmar Müller-Grabherr to reach out to the Common Forum members, and also to thank the Common Forum members who contributed to validate these soil threshold values for some of the countries. And before I move on to some of our findings, I would like to note that as was already mentioned by Sergejus, the derivation methods of the value are very important, a very important aspect, but this was unfortunately out of the scope of ARAGORN. So for the aim that we needed the soil threshold values for, so we didn't look into that. However, during our search for the values, we observed that there were definitely some differences between European countries. This is what I will present to you now. So here you can see a map of the 31 countries that we looked for within Europe for the soil threshold values. And the red countries, for the red countries, we were able to find soil threshold values in the legislation. And there were 5 countries in orange that we did not find any soil threshold values for. And these were France, Malta, Cyprus, Greece, and Luxembourg. So the reason why they do not have these soil threshold values in their legislation can differ. Some countries, they do not have specific soil legislation, and they might use values from other countries, as was already mentioned by Sergejus. But for example, we know France has a different approach, and they use a more case-specific approach to the risk assessment instead of using national soil threshold values. On the left, you can see an overview of the different countries listed and the number of entries that we found in the legislation. And this does not necessarily equal the number of substances that are legislated. It also includes, for example, summation parameters or different forms of the same substance, but it already gives you a nice overview of, or a good idea of the extent of the amount of substances that are legislated in the different countries. And we can see that Czech Republic there is on the top with 130 entries in the legislation. And most of countries, they have between 40 or 80 entries. Then I wanted to say something more specific about metals and metalloids and the soil threshold values in the different countries, because this is both a common denominator and a common divider, in the sense that all of the countries that we found soil threshold values for in the legislation, they have legislated values for metals. And there are 6 metals that are common for all of those countries. That's cadmium, copper, mercury, nickel, lead, and zinc. And we can see, for example, on the top there, Romania even has 21 metals included. So they have elaborated their legislation for metals. On the other hand, it's a common divider because every country has their own geology and their own pollution history. So also the different countries, they tend to have a different derivation methods for metals also. And what was surprising to us was that we didn't find any soil threshold values for metals in the Spanish regulation. But luckily, after validation or with the Spanish national expert from the Common Forum, we got the information that we had to look for the Spanish metal values in the legislation from the autonomous regions, because Spain has transferred the responsibility for the development of these values to the autonomous regions. Partially because of this large difference in geological background values between these regions. We also noticed that 17 out of 26 countries, they make a distinction in land use. The most common land use categories, they are in industrial areas, recreational areas, residential areas, agricultural areas, nature areas, but also some countries, they derive specific values for children's playgrounds because of the sensitivity of the life stage. Then we had a few countries like Portugal, we can see there on the top, that makes a distinction between 9 different land use categories that can be very specific. So they make a distinction between land that is with or without the use of subterranean water, and also sites that are within or further away from 30 meters from a surface water body. And then for some countries, the land use distinction can be also very vague on the other side. Some countries, they define special zones, or they simply make a distinction between sensitive or less sensitive land use area. And we can see there at the bottom that still 9 European countries, they do not make any distinction in land use. And of course, this land use distinction can be related to the protection goals. So for example, if you derive a value for nature areas, it would be possible to only take into account the ecotoxicological data for industrial, recreational, residential areas, to specifically look at the human toxicological data or so on. So it's usually the land use derivation is related to some kind of protection goal. Then we've noticed some other approaches. For example, in Germany, they make a distinction between the soil human pathway and the soil crop pathway. So the soil human pathway, it describes derives threshold values for direct exposure to soil, while the soil crop pathway, it derives values for transfer through the food chain through agricultural crops. We've also noticed that some countries use a tiered approach, was also already touched upon by Sergejus. And let's not go into the nomenclature here, but we've noticed that some can also make a distinction between an acceptable value below which there is no risk or no concern, a warning value which would trigger further investigation, and an action value which actually urges some hazard management or remediation action. Then we found also that 9 countries, they make a correction for soil characteristics some way in their already incorporated in their threshold values, or they allow for a site-specific calculation due to some formula to adjust the soil threshold value for the soil characteristics. So there can be correction for pH, clay content, total organic carbon content. And for example, Poland even has the distinction between high permeable or permeable soil and low permeable soil. And then to finalize my presentation, I would like to come back to the fact that we have the directive on soil monitoring and resilience currently on the European table. And within Europe, I think we are moving towards some degree of harmonization between the European countries. So the current situation is as visualized on the left, that each EU member state chooses if and how to set the soil threshold values. And this actually leads to a situation where the different countries might end up with different risk estimates, even though the situation might be comparable. So a way that we could improve this situation as it is now is, for example, to start a repository with the national soil threshold values that is kept to date. Could be one option, but I think that it would be a good evolution to move towards some kind of harmonization in the sense of soil threshold value derivation, so that at least there is a common guideline on how to go about this, the derivation in the different countries. So that was it for me. I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Natalie. There are a couple of questions on the Q&A chat for you. You can address them now, or we keep them for the discussions at the end. But now we will pass to the next speaker, just because we have time constraints. So I now ask Dietmar to unmute himself. I just remove permits for everyone to unmute easily, because I don't want any noise to disturb the person talking. So Dietmar, I think you should be able to unmute yourself now. And in the meantime, let me introduce you. So Dietmar, I will not pronounce your surname, sorry for that. You can do it, because I don't want to do it improperly. He represents the Common Forum Secretariat, and he will, as is written on his presentation, give us an overview of the different concepts for establishing soil threshold values and what are the common grounds and differences. So Dietmar, sorry for not being able to pronounce your surname, but you have the floor now.
Thanks, Natalia, for the nice introduction. And by starting, I really also want to thank Zacchaeus and INSOP as all to make this possible, the today workshop. It's very good to have this exchange. Also, my congrats to ARAGORN, Natalie, and Stein for their tremendous work they did in compiling the threshold values. What I will try within the next 10 to 15 minutes is just giving you some spotlights about concepts in establishing soil threshold values, and look out where the common denominators and differences in Europe might be. That's not only me, there's a lot of people, networks already mentioned. So you see the acknowledgements, it's very much with Frank Swartjes from the Netherlands, and with the European Environment Agency and the Land Network and the Common Forum. So that's the wisdom I try to bring forward. As for Common Forum, just There is just a second try. Full screen. Getting on it. So
Yeah, now it works.
Thank you, Natalia. Apologies. To let you know about Confirm Brief, that's a network of European regulators. It's not only European Union. We go beyond Switzerland and Norway are very much engaged, for example. We are here since more than 3 decades, and I'm in the capacity of the General Secretary to the network. And it's the primary goal and mission is really kind of information and knowledge exchange and then cooperating with other networks and stakeholders. What I will try to do is in my presentation to well have the spotlight and make you understand that soil policy in Europe is really kind of dealing with complexity, to make it brief, and then try to track back the origins, major aspects and history of threshold values. Finally, to look out for some common ground, what would be important in future for threshold values, which are in fact an important building block for risk-informed decisions, and then stepwise approaches in investigating and remediating contamination, soil contamination, contaminated sites. So this was an inventory the European Commission did in preparing for looking out if there is a need for further harmonization in legislative aspects in Europe. And putting it briefly, what you see, there is already a lot of legislation with the member states out there. You see these huge bars, you see these numbers on there is up to 700 instruments which at member state level explicitly or implicitly touch upon soil. And you see at the left figure also then what is there out for point source contamination, diffuse contamination. That's already a lot at the member state level. And not accounting also at the European level, we have already by the Water Framework Directive, by the Environmental Liability Directive, further on, and the Industrial Emissions Directive, not to forget further on legislation. So it's really kind of, it's a jungle of legislation, maybe. Nevertheless, if you look back for what is soil in legislation, I think it's really kind of a cross-sector. The historical origin, if I try to make it very, very simple, and it's varying between countries, I think there are 2 big sectors. It's the agriculture, of course, and soil policy, looking for fertile soils. And then it was very much with water protection policy. So there are several countries which come from one of those ends. So my country, for example, is very much driven by the water protection, whereas others, like our neighbors, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, really come very much from the agricultural side. Later on, in most of the member states, there was coming in with the mid of the 20th century, all the issues around environmental protection, prevent and limit pollution. So that's really when industrialization, a lot of regions in Europe after the Second World War took place. And finally, with all the consumption and all the waste and waste legislation came into play. So, and most likely, so that's more or less the panopticon for where soil threshold values may refer to. And even more in future, there might be still a need also then for understanding soil conditions in terms of to inform spatial planning. That's something to come. Here you see, again here for Frank Swartis and the Heracles framework, It's an overview on soil threshold values then related to different receptors. You see there are 7 receptors in the 15 countries in the HERACLES study. And you see there is well, most of the countries, they have the receptor on human health, obviously. But then if you go onwards, it's getting scarce for products and so on. Water again here is rather strong if you look for the numbers at the bottom. So it backs up what I tried to explain before, and it provides the overview then how many receptors and how complete different systems might be. If we now stick with human health and go on for here, so the usual thing is that several countries around Europe, everyone has his own model to calculate exposure. So through the different pathways, oral, thermal, and inhalation. And there is well, in general, I would say there are similar structures, obviously, because that's how the system, the natural system works and exposure works. The differences come then with the boundary conditions and input parameters of the models. And those models then are also used often to back calculate for threshold values. So you put parameters on default, and then you come up with magic numbers, which are soil threshold values, which mostly then might be related to land uses, so that particular exposure scenarios are defined for land use and then coming down to a soil threshold. In terms of what Natalie raised in terms of harmonization, here a quick reaction already. So is there a need of one set of European soil threshold values? Well, Common Forum members and me myself, we don't believe at the time being, but you might convince us. What we really would argue for is nowadays to have a common framework, a guidance, and really building on joint principles. That would already be very, very helpful. And in here also the starting point for more transparency in where the soil threshold values are embedded. And then what would be a further step for harmonization, which would be important, is really to look for integrated data sets for things which are really similar. So in terms of toxicity data, there is no question to me that best science should be in there for the tolerable daily intake to make it really comparable. And also then there would be a window of opportunity, I think, for new contaminants, call it contaminants of emerging concern, which everyone would be keen then if we come up with a harmonized approach, and there's the door open. As well, in terms of common concepts, I think we are, and it's also kind of, as Nathalie Briels also emphasized, the proposal for the European soil monitoring law, where the chapter 4 is in contaminated sites, and then it's really kind of also relates and it's titled to risk-based approaches. And this was something agreed already 20 years ago. To provide it rather simple by this figure, this is coming from the Clarinet network at that time. This was the new thinking, really, then providing for that the soil, the topsoil, that's really something quality related to land use in terms of solution. We need to keep a particular quality in relation to land use. If the pollution is further down, then look for the environmental benefits and balance it. Whether it's really appropriate and sustainable to go there. And in terms of the mobility of pollutants, of course, that's something we need to prevent further spreading. So what it all aims is really kind of, well, by risk assessment, prepare risk-informed decisions, and then as a follow-up to allow for designing and implementing sustainable solutions, which then go bring different further aspects in, which are not only the risk assessment, but which are really economic aspects, technical feasibility, and also social aspects. Here, referenced also the report Natalie Brief already, emphasized by the European Environment Agency, where this nice figure on how they understand or look for soil threshold values could be. And it's really then also to point out that in particular, whatever the term is, here it is, warning value and action value. The meanings, again, as a reminder, what Zacchaeus explained at the beginning is really that at the country level, we need to look up what is really the role of those values. And furthermore, also I want to point out that the soil threshold value, even if it's there in legislation or standards, but it doesn't at any means legitimate any right to release contaminants. So preventing pollution is the foremost duty to everyone's there. Nevertheless, we are convinced, and I think also in the IONET members, that in future still there will be some accounting for differences which are simply explained by the natural system, climate, and societal systems. Even we need to respect probably that the culture and decision making might be rather different in different countries. When well, my common ground and hypothesis for Europe. So if you look for the proposal set up by the European Commission on the Soil Monitoring Directive, it's discussing chemical soil condition, and there we could look for, well, maybe a green kind of a classification, like what I tried here, coming of course from my national background here in Austria, to make it easy in my way. So, but here also to see what's the common denominator nowadays, I would say, it's well depicted in the proposal or the amendments suggested by the European Council. So target values were really good quality. That's something we maybe could agree at the European level. Trigger values would be foreseen by the European Council, which suggests to leave it to the country level. And those could be land use related. As for intervention values, I am really, and conform probably most of the members, is really skeptical for intervention values. Well, we doubt that there would be direct linear relationships to risks. And so that's really then something where we need to go to look closer to sites and then look for tailor-made solutions. Well, Natal, I hope this was informative, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dietmar. It was very, very illustrative indeed. And I think particularly this last slide will be the basis for our discussion today on the different type of threshold values we could develop and have. Thank you very much for that. It was very clear. We are a little bit late, so let's move on to the next presentation. It will be done by Ivan Semenkov from Moscow State University, who will present the national threshold values and the application in the Russian Federation. Ivan, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Yes, there you are. Please put presentation mode. Great. I cannot hear you. I don't know if it's only me. You are on mute, but I don't hear anything. Ivan?
I cannot hear Ivan as well.
And we cannot see you either. We see you now, but We still don't hear you. Ah, sorry, there is another Ivan. I don't have another Ivan on the participant list. Let's do one thing. Since we are a little bit late on the agenda, let's move on to the next presentation while we try to solve the technical issues. And then we come back to you if that is agreeable with you. Great, thank you. So then let's move on to the case of China that will be presented by Deji Hu and how they have developed the national threshold values and how they are applied. So Deji, back to you. Now let me unmute yourself. Yes, now you should be able to unmute and share your screen as well.
Hi, Natalia. Let me share my screen now.
And in the meantime, I will work with Ivan to solve his issues.
Okay. Can you see me? Can you see the screen?
Yes, now it's there. Just put presentation mode, please.
Let me see. Okay.
Yes, there you are. Great, thank
okay.
you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a great pleasure to give this presentation. I'm going to talk about the national threshold values and their application in China. First, I want to briefly introduce the history of the soil quality thresholds. The first set of threshold values that was published in China was dated back to 1995. It was called the Environmental Quality Standard for Soils. It was used for more than 20 years. And in 2018, the national government updated those values, and it was divided into two regulatory standards, one for agricultural land and another for development land. Before I get to the latest version of the threshold values, I first want to introduce the old values that was released in 1995. The EQS, which represents the environmental quality standards, was based on several factors. It was based on the soil background. It was also based on some ecological tests and also data from geographically anomalous areas, as well as information about soil threshold values from other countries. This EQS set the maximum acceptable concentration of pollutants and the relevant monitoring methods. In this 1995 standard, three types of criteria were set. It was named type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 was to protect soils in national nature reserves, centralized drinking water resource areas, and tea plantations, pastures, and other protected areas. And the goal was to basically maintain the natural background level of those soil pollutants or elements. Type 2 is applicable to the soil in general farmland, land for growing vegetables, orchards, and so on. And the goal was to not cause a health risk, either by the plant uptake to the crops and the vegetables. Type 3 was applicable to woodland soil, farmland soils near high background soils. Basically, these three types, they get less and less stringent from type 1 to type 3. On this page, I list some of the threshold values. As you can see, the major heavy metals are listed there, and the threshold values for paddy and dry land, they are separated. There are also some persistent organic pollutants like HCHs and DDTs. In 2018, we updated this regulatory thresholds. The reason was after more than 20 years of usage, the Chinese government recognized that over 2 decades of industrialization, there were a lot of soil pollution occurring. And we needed to take a more risk-centered approach. It took us a number of years to develop these standards. Both standards were released in 2018 and took effect very quickly. Now for the 2018 standards, first I want to introduce the standard for agriculture soil. This standard regulates the soil risk screening values and the risk intervention values in agriculture land. It also put some requirements for monitoring and supervision. The exposure pathways considered for this set of standard is mainly the ingestion of contaminated crops. Because in China, we have existing standards for food quality. So this soil threshold were basically derived based on those food standards. And for the agriculture land, it was classified into different types, including arable land, garden, and pasture. So there are 2 sets of threshold values. One is the risk screening value. For the risk screening value, it basically indicates if the contaminant level is equal or below this value, then the risk is considered acceptable. If it is above the risk screening level, then it's necessary to enhance the monitoring because there is potential risk. And in many cases, we needed to monitor the contaminant level in the food product to ensure it is safe to consume the food. And as for the risk intervention value, when that is exceeded, we consider the risk to be high, regardless of the food product concentration. We are required to take some action to protect the agricultural land. So when we derived these social values, we took into consideration a number of aspects, including the quality of the agricultural products, like the rice, grains, maize, and vegetables. We also intended to protect the growth of crop to make sure that the crop can grow well when the soil condition is acceptable. And we also intended to protect the soil microorganisms because that was considered part of the soil health, and which ultimately will also affect the long-term sustainability of agriculture output. For the agricultural land, there are not many contaminants being regulated. Most of them were heavy metals. For 6 of them, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, lead, chromium, and copper, we had threshold values for paddy and others. And then we also had different threshold values for different pH. Typically, lower pH correspond to more stringent threshold values. For example, for cadmium, which was the most stringent, when the pH was less than 5.5, the risk screen level was 0.3 milligram per kilogram. I believe this is one of the most stringent threshold values in the world. Even when the pH is high, when the pH is 0.8, the pH is over 7.5, and the cadmium threshold is still quite stringent, is 0.8 milligram per kilogram. For agricultural soil, we also regulated the 3 organic pollutants, including HCH, DDTs, and the benzoyl and their threshold values, the screening values were 0.1 to 0.55. For the risk intervention values, it's nearly 1 order of magnitude higher. For cadmium, it ranged from 1.5 to 4 milligram per kilogram. And for this, it didn't had a distinction between the paddy and the other type of land. Next, I want to briefly introduce the threshold values for the development land. This standard regulates the soil risk screening values and the risk intervention values for the development land and its monitoring and supervision and so on. For development land, there are 2 types. Type 1 land refers to some more sensitive receptors. This includes residential land, primary and secondary school, medical and healthcare, social welfare facility, and the community park or children's park. And type 2 land, which is less stringent, it included industrial land, logistics and warehousing, commercial, utility, road and transportation facility, public service, and urban green space. There are also 2 sets of threshold values, including risk screening value and the risk intervention value. And the usage of these 2 sets of values is a little bit different from the agricultural soil. For the agricultural soil, they differ mainly in that we needed to test for the food products. But here, if the risk screening value is exceeded, then we are supposed to do risk assessment, site-specific risk assessment to determine whether risk is acceptable and at what threshold it is acceptable. And if it is, if the soil concentration exceeds risk intervention value, then it's considered unacceptable. And no matter what the risk assessment says, the owner, the site owner or the liability owner is required to take action. For the development land, the main exposure pathways considered included the oral ingestion, thermal contact, inhalation of soil particle matters, inhalation of gaseous pollutants from superficial soil in outdoor air, inhalation of gaseous pollutants from the subsoil in the outdoor air, and the inhalation of gaseous pollutants from the subsoil in the indoor air. And here I want to show you some risk screening values and the intervention values. If you look at this table, to the right, I have 2 columns showing the screening value for type 1 land and type 2 land, and then the intervention value for type 1 land and type 2 land. As you can see, for example, for cadmium, we had a very stringent threshold for values for the agricultural land, which was like 0.3 to 0.8 milligram per kilogram. But for development land, the threshold values are much higher. It ranged from 20 to 172. And similarly, many other heavy metals have similar patterns. For the development, the number of heavy metals being regulated are similar to the agricultural soil, but for the organic pollutants, they are a lot more. There are a lot of volatile organic pollutants, as you can see on this page. I mean, one of the most stringently regulated was like chloroform, and the social value for type 1 land was 0.3 milligram per kilogram. And there are more VOC, like benzene, toluene, and so on. There are also a number of PAHs. And here I only listed 45 of them, but actually there were a lot more. But these 45 were called like basic contaminants of concern. So right now, if you were to do any sort of investigation in China, you are supposed to analyze for all these basic contaminants of concern, but there are also a lot of additional, there were another 40 compounds or analyzed, like, TPH. We are supposed to analyze for them if a site is suspected to have such contamination. So to summarize, in China currently there are two sets of social values, one for agricultural land and another for development land. And they are risk screening values and risk intervention values. The exposure pathways considered for the agricultural land is mainly the ingestion of contaminated crop, and the exposure pathways considered for development land as mainly oral ingestion, skin contact or dermal contact, and inhalation. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dei. Very interesting presentation, and yeah, indeed, very advanced work that has been done in China with the development of all those threshold values. I see there is a hand. Let's take it just one quick question before we move into the next presentation. Yeah, Shania from ARAGORN. Let me allow you to unmute. You should be able now.
Yes, thank you very much, Natalie. And thank you very much for this very interesting presentation from China. I had a question because I saw you have limit values for HCAs and DDTs. And is that then the sum of these compounds? Or can you maybe say a little bit about whether you monitor for like the specific ones and sum them, or you have a grouping methods? Thank you.
Well, for HCH, they have alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Mm-hmm. For the DDT, there are PP, DDE, DDD, DDT. For DDT, there are OP DDT and PP DDT.
Okay, thank you. And would it be possible to get this presentation? Because I think it's very interesting what you have developed here.
Thank you. All the presentations and as well the recordings will be shared with all the participants and the register members as well. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, indeed, we have over 500 registers to the meeting. So although not all of them are attending, but yeah, there is a lot of interest on this work. And even now you should be able to speak.
Do you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Great, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So the second time, I would like to say from the beginning, maybe repeat some points. The main principles for establishing soil threshold values in different countries and especially in Russia. So there are different endpoints. For example, ecosystems, human health, plants, water, air, indoor, outdoor, risk assessment, and different scientific bases. For example, local background, versatility, and reassessment during time, and diet of people of the target country. As for Russia, the most problem of our legislation is connected with no risk assessment and local background assessment. So next, I try to explain what is the main idea of Russian threshold values. So now there is one document. It is called in Russia like Sanpin, and it is open access, but it is in Russian. So we have maximum permissible concentrations for soils, and firstly, initially from Soviet threshold values, we had maximum permissible concentrations and estimated permissible concentrations. As for maximal permissible concentrations, it is an experimentally validated value. For indicators of harmfulness was evaluated, namely ecological, translocation from soil to plants, translocation from soil to surface water, and translocation from soil, polluted soil, to air. And some preliminary analysis should be processed before target permissible concentrations would be proposed. For example, consideration of production and wastes of special activities and valuation of already available maximum permissible concentrations in air, surface water, or in plants. And as for estimated permissible concentrations, they are a calculated value. And they are soil specific. There are three types of soils, sandy and sandy loams. Second one is loamy and clayic acidic soils, and the last one is loamy and clay near neutral soil. So regulatory development is connected with the study of the substance stability and mobility in the environments. Then should be identified the most sensitive components. It could be air, plants, surface water, or microbiota. And I would like to tell about the main processes. First of all, experiments in thermostats and different air humidity and temperature, and soil organic matter content and acidity. For example, for tests, we should take diverse soils, for example, Chernozomes, alluvial soils, and so on. And for trace elements, it is more relevant to use mobile fractions and estimate the degree of transformation because of different processes of initial pollution can be found in soil. For example, volatilization, evaporation, destruction by ultraviolet plants or microbiota, or different type of migrations by leaching or absorption by soil particles. As for evaluation transfer from soil to plants, it should be two types of experiments: preliminary pot experiments in petri dishes and field experiments. First step is modeling the maximum translocation of the substance from soil to plants in a short period of time. And as for field experiments, the aim is justification of the permissible level for substance in soils and providing a safe level for human health in agricultural plants. Preliminary tests is pot experiments in petri dishes. And here you can see the model substrate. It's sand that free of organic matter and different mineral inclusions. And this substrate should be treated with mixture containing different fertilizers and as for control, this is a plant germination test. The most popular plants, cultivated plants are wheat, barley, oats, peas, cucumbers, and white mustard. The second step is connected with the field experiments. And we use the target plant species that are common in human diet. And if we try to make the threshold value for pesticides, we should take into account only target plants and crops that are grown after treatment. And all calculations should be made for marketable products, for example, seeds, leaves, or beets. Second evaluation is connected with the transfer from polluted soil to surface water. There is experiments with the filtration units or columns. This is a huge column, and soil should be separated for some layers. And the duration of the experiment is 3 months. 600 millimeters of water should be used. It is the average annual precipitation rate for the middle part of the Soviet Union, and every 5 days, 20-25 milliliters of filtrates should be used for evaluations. The third type of experiments is connected with assessment migration of pollutants from soil to air, and they simulates evaporation of target substances under different conditions. And the last type of experiments are connected with the ecological threshold values. This two sub-steps, preliminary and main studies. And only microbiota is evaluated. So preliminary studies are connected with the aqueous solution of the sample substances under consideration, and from 3 to 5 varieties of Escherichia coli are used for test. And in the end, it should be suppressed by at least 50% of colony relative to the control, and selection of the most sensitive microorganism for the next main experiment. As for the main experiment, it's more long, and the main idea is control of microbiological indicators and biochemical respiration, as well as ammonium and nitrogen content in several days after the beginning of treatment. And some additional indicators could be used if we think that are valuable. So now we have some threshold values for inorganic pollutants and for organic pollutants. Here, I just show you only metals and metalloids, and for these pollutants, we can see that some threshold values are specific for soils, and in the right part I showed that the main sensitive endpoint, for example, soil microbiota is for chromium 6 plus, manganese, and vanadium. And we have threshold values for Maybell fractions of some heavy metals, for example, cobalt, manganese, copper, nickel, and so on. And if we compare the set of metals and metalloids that are legislative, we can see that 25 elements are in Russian system, and this is one of the longest set. So application in the Russian Federation is specified for all settlements, agricultural lands, zones of secondary protection of water supply sources, territories of resorts, and several institutions. Compliance of these threshold values is mandatory for citizens, individual entrepreneurs, and legal entities. These threshold values guarantee one health in case of control of the level of application or ingestion of target substance. And they use in environmental impact assessment, not all the set of values, but for some chemical elements, benzopyrene, and total petroleum hydrocarbons. Moreover, threshold values are used for reclamation of disturbed lands and impacted lands in dams. So here we can see the list of references. The main is SunPin, that is actual, and other legislative acts are outdated, but they provide some valuable information. And here you can see some scientific publications in Russian. Some of them are literature review about Russian legislation systems and analysis and comparable analysis with the different countries. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Very interesting as well to see all the work that has been done on the applicability of the threshold values in the Russian Federation. Thank you for that. So with that, because the most important part of this meeting is indeed the discussion, we would like to open for addressing some of the questions that were in the Q&A chat, but as well any other questions you may have after the last two presentations, as well as to define how INSOP will move forward, not only with the collection of threshold values and methodologies from different countries, but what comes next once we have this list of threshold values. For that, I pass over to you, Sergius, for moderating the discussion. And again, thank you so much to all the presenters for your time and for sharing the work done in your countries. Thank you, and Sergius, back to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for helping us to navigate around in those presentations. It was very enriched. Indeed, if you have any questions, now it's time to address them either to any of those speakers that you just heard the presentations, or help us in the discussion process of how we're going to move forward to the next. I think we're already quite successful because I see two members already said that, for example, in Tanzania and Nigeria, there are threshold values. So we have +2 countries who can share their values with us. So that's very good to know. So yeah, if there's any other countries that you represent or you're aware of, but you didn't see it in the map marked as a green, I think it's an opportunity for us to include it in the discussion. Natalie, thanks going to you because we have some questions addressed in the QA chat box. The first one I see by Diana. Diana, good afternoon. Happy to see you. Would you like to address your question directly to Natalie, or you would like me to read the question to her, Diana, way you prefer? So Diana and Natalie asking, are these STV maps available per contaminant type or not? Do you have the answer for it? Natalia, did you unmute all the speakers? Otherwise, the discussion will be just for myself.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Now you should be eligible. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I was blocked. I couldn't unmute myself. So it was about the maps that I showed, right?
Yes, that
That's
refers.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So no, we only made an overview of the that I showed. So of the only if soil threshold values are being used or not per contaminant type. That would be a good idea.
And is there any relationship between number of different metals reported and category of land uses in the European Union? I think that can be a question to both Natalie or Dietmar. Question by Anju, our guest speaker.
I have to admit, I have not looked into that. I think usually when there's a distinction in land use, it's for all of the contaminants. So that's at least our observation. But maybe Dietmar has another experience with this.
See, Xenia has a hand on. Xenia, would you like to complement something here?
Yes, I just wanted to offer that, I mean, we have the Excel spreadsheets, and it contains a lot of details, and we could share that, and then these detailed questions could come out of an analysis of that, including also if you wanted to make maps based on contaminants, we could also it would be fairly easy to do that. So I don't know, is that with you, Sergius, we would share it? Or how would we do that?
Yes, you can share it. You can share it with me. I will compile all the presentations plus additional material that you can share with me, and then I will just disclose on our webpage and share it to all the participants here.
And I'm a little bit interested in how you would use the information. Would that be to make the maps for your work, or is it more additional information? Because I think we have not yet published on it, so we would like to share it with you for your information, but maybe not make it generally available, if that's okay.
Not generally. Yes, that's totally acceptable. Yes, absolutely. As long as you say to us,
Thank you.
Perfect. Dayu, you have a hand. Would you like to complement something here?
So, Sergi, could you share your screen and show people the PowerPoint slide where we have the countries where we get a threshold values and where we don't? Because I think we have over 100 attendees. Some of them may have not got a chance to take a close look at this. I hope that people can take another look more closely. And if there is any attendee who see that in their country there are threshold values, but it's in gray here, then please contact Sergius or me or Ravi, and let us get that information.
That's right. Thank you very much, Dave, for compliments. Yes, indeed, as I said, we have a guest here from Tanzania and Nigeria already said that we can mark them with green because they have the threshold values at national level. So we're looking forward to see them and making sure that cross-reference that they're actually national and endorsed. Felipe, good afternoon. Happy to see you.
Hello, Sergeyus. Good afternoon. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, I was wondering because of the presentation are very, very nice. But I was wondering if because I think the threshold values are very important, and also it's very important the definition of the glossary, in order to define if talking about threshold values, screening values, background values, or whatever. But I was wondering also if not only the threshold values are important, but also it's important the methodologies, the lab analysis, in order to identify the fractions, no? Because as I realized even during the presentation, for instance, it's very depend of some countries also I take consideration threshold values, take consideration some soil properties, for instance, pH, no? But also, for instance, in this case, the presentation of the college from Russia, they are measuring the pH, they are using the pH measuring in calcium, potassium chloride, but maybe another country take consideration the pH measuring in water or in calcium chloride. This is just one factor, no? But also it's important if we are determining or we are collecting data from threshold values measuring by using, I don't know, Aquarella, or in other countries they are using the total fraction by using fluoride acid, or maybe in other countries they are using even using the same methodology, depend of the lab, it's a depend of the procedure following the lab, maybe the results are different. It's a maybe they need some harmonization and also some, I don't know, pedotransfer fractions just to I don't know, to make the comparison between them. My question is easily say, I would like to know if also you are collecting this type of metadata in order to know not only the threshold values in the right units, like make it milligram or kilo or microgram per gram per kilogram, sorry, but also this type, because I think this information is, how do you say, not critical, but it's very, very important just to know if this data could be compared, but also take consideration not only for Europe, because for Europe also is a mess, but also I don't know if for the rest of the no, I don't know, of the world, no. This is my reflection or question or I don't know, discussion. Thank you, Sergeyus.
No, Felipe, that's a very important topic that you touched, especially harmonization among laboratories, because if we cannot agree at that initial stage in the labs, obviously the deviations, and that can lead to big differences. And Natalia, I think that's where Glossaland and our network of soil laboratories needs and plays a very important role, not only for us, for the GSP, but for the whole. So we have the global network of Glossaland. How many labs there, Natalia? Do you know the number?
We have over 1,200 now.
Right, from most of the countries, right? And that's where we actually develop those harmonized procedures, including how to measure pH and heavy metals. And we train those laboratories technicians so we can compare this data from around the world. And we do not collect this information now when you talk about the information in the labs, but what we're trying to focus here is to promote, we can't force obviously all labs to harmonize everything, but at least we train them and we promote one SOP so that we can compare this information from different labs around the world, because that can lead to deviation at that stage.
But you are collecting data on the units used for the threshold values.
On the units, yes. On the units, yes. For example, I think I was playing around with Israel data because they send me everything in different units, and I was converting them to milligrams per kilo, so to make sure that we have everything consistent. Now we have all the information from milligrams per kilo, even though if the information I received was in different units. David Coffey Dockley, good afternoon. I can see your hand first. Would you like to comment or you have a question? David, can you please unmute yourself? Yes.
Good afternoon from here. Yeah. Thank you so much for this event. I wish to say that I'm very glad to be a participant. Yeah, so I have a few things I wish to know.
David, your connection is breaking apart. Can you please write your question in the chat box and I will address it.
Sure. Thank you.
Apologies for this. Yeah, just please feel free to write your question in the chat box and I will address them to participants here. Ksenia, I see your hand next. Would you like to comment or have a question?
Yes, so thank you very much. It's a comment and question, because I fully agree that pH will of course make a huge difference in the amount that you find, in the amount you quantify, and therefore, if you want to have a harmonized legislation, you need to define under which pH conditions that you said. Either you define which pH conditions that you do your measurement at, and you have one limit value, or you have different limit values at different pHs, we just saw. But I think this is something, at least the principles would be nice to have written down, and then until, you know, harmonized methods can exist, then fine. But it brings me to another question, and that is this perhaps a question for you, Dietmar, because this point about risk-based approach, how do you see this in relation to bioavailability? Because if we talk about risk for uptake in crops, then it's the bioavailable fraction that typically is uptaken. So it's coming back to this question about defining methods, because then we would also have to define, you know, aqua regio, as Felipe said, or we would have to define for organic contaminants. Do we measure the pore water, or do we measure everything which is available in the soil, etc.? This is super important to clarify. So maybe, Dietmar, you have a good answer, or is this something we have to discuss further?
Well, I would say that's something to discuss further. In principle, it's bioavailability and bioaccessibility. That's the way to go, probably. Still, if you look for a tiered approach, it's making it as easy as possible at the first stage. That's the question, and also that's why probably the background, and then also for keeping the records. There was this idea to going for bioavailability in the proposal of the Commission. Most of the member states responded that they still want to keep the aqua regia. I think a combination would be perfect to look for, but that's only a personal opinion.
Okay, but I think it clarifies it's at least somewhat, but it then also, when we looked at, it's called something different, but typically there's these screening levels and then there are the intervention levels, but at least at the screening level, keep it simple. And then at the later stage, when you say now you really have to assess, is there a risk or not, then you can go ahead and do the bioavailability. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, indeed, the fraction of the metals, for example, that Ksenia is quite important, because, you know, some inorganic elements such as chromium, lead, or mercury exist in different oxidation states and may occur as organometallic compounds. And each of the species has different bioavailability and hence toxic and genotoxic effects. So that's something we have to consider here. Paul, good afternoon, Paul. I see your hand here. Feel free to unmute yourself and comment.
Yeah, just a question to you, but a comment on bioavailability first. In the UK, we assume 100% oral bioavailability apart from lead. Lead's a bit of a strange one. But plant uptake factors, we consider 6 different types of edible produce, and we look at the uptake into the part of the plant that we actually eat. The problem we have with PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, is that the models for uptake we use for metals or for organics do not work. And so what I've been doing is doing essentially a sensitivity analysis for different plant uptake factor values, to see whether it makes a difference to my risk evaluation, the outcome of the risk assessment. So I hope that helps the person who was asking about bioavailability. My question to you with your standard methods is, when you are reporting a total concentration, is that for the sub 2 millimeter fraction in the soil, or the gross sample, which would include any coarser particles? And the same goes to the people who are reporting screening values. Is it the concentration in the total soil, or only in the sub 2 millimeter fraction that generally we think might be eaten, might be ingested?
If I'm not mistaken, at time, please correct me here, it's for the total soil sample, not just 2 millimeter fraction, that we have the SOP for that.
Okay, that's interesting. And the reason I asked the question is there are two international standards on bioaccessibility testing. One assumes sub 2 millimeter, and the other one assumes total soil. But there isn't any clear reasoning as to why you should use one rather than the other. So it's just important, as well as units, to define the material that the numbers apply to. Just a big word of caution there.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree with you. Well noted. Ravi, you have a hand. Would you like to comment on what you've heard?
Thanks very much, Sargis, and thanks very much, Paul. You made my what I'm going to say much easier as well. First and foremost, in Australia, we have threshold screening values that are based on total loading, irrespective of soil types, and that the threshold values are 100% bioavailable, and should the total exceed threshold value, that's when we say you got to now assess bioavailability or bioavailable fraction. We do have standard operating procedures for metals and metalloids, and therefore it's not that much of a challenge to assess bioavailability. Whereas for organic contaminants, I haven't seen any country where they have standard operating procedures for bioavailability. That's one thing. The second thing is that for in vivo bioavailability, one always takes into consideration children. When they are crawling, for example, what gets stuck to their hand, and therefore it's not total whole soil, it's rather always very fine fraction is what we take into consideration. I'm going to say more on this when I sum up. So we do not have different threshold values for different soil types. It's total for all. It is bioavailability that we take into consideration. And also we do not have threshold values that vary depending on soil properties. So just to take that into consideration, it makes life much easier then. Thank you very much, Sajid.
Thank you, Ravi. Paul, do you have a follow-up comment on that? I see your hand.
Yes, just to let people know that in the UK, we use a bioavailability test for PAHs called the Forest method, developed at the British Geological Survey. And as Ravi says, we use that at what we would call the detailed quantitative risk assessment stage. But the Forest method is the one that we use for large hydrocarbons, as opposed to what is now an international standard, but it effectively came out of the work of the BARGE, the Bioaccessibility Research Group in Europe.
Right, yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, well, I see that we have a lot of interesting discussion, but we have to wrap up. My take-home message, and Ravi and Dee, you can confirm here, is that success is that we already have 4 more countries that we're missing from our list, where we actually have threshold values endorsed national level. So we still need to go ahead and collect them. And I see African countries that were underrepresented. They do have some threshold values from some countries, so that's what we need to include in our next step. and also to collect information from our global soil partnership focal points that I think Natalia already ongoing process. And I think we're going to have a survey be received from all focal points by the end of this year. So we can have a global picture, making sure that we're not missing anyone at this stage. So I think that's something that we can continue doing for the next 2 to 3 months. And then starting from next year, I think we still need to continue discussion bioavailability. Paul, you mentioned a very important point here. We also see in the chat that Cyprus, for example, we saw from Natalie's presentation that we don't have any threshold values from Cyprus, although Paul says that Cyprus adopt the UK threshold values, and we also need to consider and investigate. And then starting from there on, probably at the beginning of next year, we need to have a second workshop, including more countries. We just heard the European Union, Russia, and China, but there's more countries that we would like to learn from and understand the methodology and derivations. So I'm pretty sure it's just the beginning of this kind of series of workshops that we can organize. And I see the participant number is quite high. So I think we can continue work in that direction. And starting from next year, we can start developing a product, which is a global report on the derivation of those threshold values and the development of dashboard, obviously, depending on the resources that we can get from countries. Paul, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just to clarify, the work we did for the Department of the Environment of Cyprus was to develop values for Cyprus using the method in the UK, but using Cypriot input values. We did not simply use the UK values. They have Cyprus flavored values.
And did they endorse those values at the national level? Do you know? Do they endorse those values at the national level?
Well, they paid us to develop them. The government of Cyprus paid me to develop them. They're published and they're being used at the moment. Yes.
Okay, so Natalie, there you go. Something to know. See, this is all about the knowledge exchange and dialogue here. So that's a good. Thanks a lot.
I'll try and find the link to the environment for you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Anthony, good evening, Anthony. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Sergio. Sorry, my video is off. I just wanted to quickly make a point that, by definition, I think soil is the less than 2 mm fraction. Less than 2 mm fraction by definition. So I would think that most of our analysis and threshold values should be based on this less than 2 mm fraction. So if we were to compare threshold values from different countries, well, because Sergio, I thought I understood you to say previously that, the total concentration was done on the bulk soil. I think we should be, for easy comparison, we should be looking at less than 2 mm fraction. And Ravi was also talking about bioavailability, and a number of other people mentioned bioaccessibility. There is this confusion about what is bioavailability and bioaccessibility. I think those are 2 different terms, and I think it's important to sort of take note of that. And the fraction that sticks to the hands of children is about less than 150 microns, depending on, so when you conduct your bioaccessibility test, you actually don't conduct that on the less than 2 mm fraction. You want to sieve the soil and conduct that, either your oral bioavailability study by feeding soil to animals using this very fine fraction, less than 150 micron. In fact, some studies, recent studies from Canada or in the US, I can't remember, actually concluded that the fraction that sticks to the children's hands is even about 45 micron. So it's important to make this differentiation, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dei, your comment?
Yes, I want to concur with Anthony. So in China, we only analyze for soil fraction that's less than 2 mm. When we get a soil sample, it is dried and then use the 2 mm sieve to remove all the gravels and plant residuals, which doesn't pass the sieve. And if there are soil aggregates which didn't pass the sieve, then they are crushed to make sure that they will pass it. And then we will only analyze the portion that's less than 2 mm. I agree with Anthony. I think this should be a requirement so that we can compare. Otherwise, because there are conditions where the gravels and other organic materials, I think that will distort the concentration.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dave. Okay, and we're going to conclude now because we all have to respect time. And I do apologize. We did not discuss all the questions that are here, but I promise I'm going to go through the chat box tonight. And if there's any questions that we didn't address, I will come back to you. I have all your emails here in my recording, so I'll come back to you with the answer. But yes, we have to conclude. And Ravi, I see your hand either as a comment. Feel free to address, and then a concluding remark from your side, please.
Thanks very much, Sargis. Look, I love what Anthony just took us through about bioavailability and bioaccessibility. But I would not agree with him about the definition of soil, because the definition of soil, engineer's definition of soil, is less than 2 millimeter fraction. Now, remember giving a distinguished lecture in US where I went through definition of soil, and I said, this is what engineers define soil as. So we can have a chat about that, Anthony, sometime as well. Let me just start my concluding remarks by taking us all the way to 1970. If my memory is with me, it was 2nd December 1970 when US EPA was the first EPA that was launched. And the state of Victoria in Australia had already launched the Victorian Environment Protection Act, but EPA Victoria was launched in, I think, early 1971. The chair of the EPA Victoria always quite unhappy that they just missed being the very first EPA to have been launched globally. The reason I'm bringing this to your attention is that between the time when US EPA was launched and today, 54 years. And threshold values that just didn't come into being when the EPAs were launched. It takes time to come up with threshold values. And therefore, the very advanced countries, they invest a lot and they came up with threshold values. And the countries that are not that advanced, they slowly bring threshold values together. And then there are countries that are still do not have sufficient resources to develop threshold values or pull together threshold values that we have in other countries. That said, the workshop that you had today, I must give credit to Sargis and Natalia for pulling together such a great structure for the workshop, with the first presentation that was by Sargis. And if my memory is with me, Sargis, you started by defining screening values and intervention values, the difference between that, and then we took us through, and then we said the next step would be to see whether we can understand and describe the differences in the approaches for derivation of threshold values. And you also talked about basically all the major pathways of human exposures that needs to be taken into consideration. And then he moved on and basically took us the many countries that do have threshold values and those that don't have threshold values. And the INSOP task is to see how we could assist countries to derive their own national, regional threshold values based on GSP FAO conceptual model. So that was a great presentation that then led us to Natalia's presentation. I thought that was also a great one, because ARAGORN is basically taking into consideration what's going on in Europe, starting with the presentation, a map of contaminated sites in Europe, particular contaminants that will be targeting, the risk assessment framework, and threshold values. Interestingly, for Europe, for example, there are 5 countries that do not have any threshold values. And when you look at Portugal, for example, it seems that Portugal is so focused on so many different contaminants as well, way ahead of some of the other countries. That then took us to EU Common Forum Soil Threshold Values, and Dietmar's presentation was also another excellent one. And what was really, to me, it was really great as well, that Dietmar mentioned that soil policy in Europe is all about dealing with complexity. And not many countries where I see we take into consideration diffuse contaminants. And Dietmar showed us the indicators of diffuse contamination as well. So that's something which we do need to take into consideration. And then it took us risk assessment, risk-based land management, and risk-based framework as well, and which is what, in fact, Australia's national guidelines, which was launched in 1999, is all based on risk-based framework as well. We then moved forward with the host presentation, another great presentation. It's quite interesting because in 1995, China had all these policies about soil guidelines, for instance. And then I think a bit later, it was 2005, when China took into consideration all the pollutants, crop quality, for instance, invested a lot of resources to come up with whole range of threshold values. And interesting to see threshold values based on pH and soil properties as well. A lot of effort must have been invested into deriving that. We then heard from a friend in Russia discussing target and trigger values, threshold values. And here we also had about plants, for example, and the different methods, approaches to assess threshold values, quite different from the way some of the other countries are doing. So what we saw today is that most countries that have threshold values, they have used their own approaches to come up with threshold values, but they're all about different land users as well, the different receptors as well. The sensitivity is taken into consideration. So going forward, it will be really great to be able to collaborate and have input from different countries and see how INSOP could come up with a global map of threshold values, taking into consideration. That's what I first heard from GSP as well, that we should be able to come up with threshold values. So with that, Sarges and Natalia, I would say a great workshop, great presentations. We've learned a lot, but not forgetting, it's not about just threshold values, but it's also about bioavailability and bioaccessibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ravi. That's, I think, very succinctly summarized. And as I said, let's continue in this direction, having a series of workshops with other countries involved. Xenia, thank you very much. I already have agenda for the next workshop with all those questions that you possess here in the chat. I think I'm going to work on that. And we're going to organize a second workshop very soon once we have more information. If you are interested to represent your country and explain the process and methodology of your threshold values, do not hesitate to drop an email so that we can discuss and put you on agenda for the second round of discussion. Natalia, colleagues, Day, Ravi, Natalie, Dietmar, and Ivan, thank you very much for all these presentations, and we're looking forward for the future collaboration. All the summaries, all the recordings and presentations will be available on our website very soon, and I will notify you once they're uploaded there. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you, and my appreciation to all as well.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks, Natalia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.